TV, it's a formula they use. They have these people dancing on the beach and happy. If they ever had a disease, they're now healed by this drug whose name is on the screen. And then at the end of the commercial, when they by law have to put all of the side effects like death, light stuff like that, then they have the nicest, sweetest music with the dogs and everybody happy. To me, it's deceptive and unfair, and I don't like it. However, here's the real problem. The real problem is that it costs, and I know you may not have much sympathy for pharmaceutical industry, and believe me, I don't either. But it costs $2 billion to get a drug through the FDA. That system has to be reformed, not for the pharmaceutical industries, but for the American public, so that they can have more access to cutting-edge medicines that are available elsewhere in the world. Then the whole issue of marketing on TV becomes a secondary annoyance rather than a terrible intrusion.
May I respond to that? Or?
No, we're going to keep to time, but our third question comes from Jennifer, who says, can the candidates describe if and how they will put politics and personalities aside and work with the opposite party? There is too much finger-pointing, blaming, and name-calling on both sides of the aisle, and it's not doing any good for Americans. Lauren Supan, you get to respond to Jennifer first.
Well, Jennifer, I think that's an excellent question, and my goal would be to be a unifier in the United States Senate. As I mentioned earlier, my objective in every situation is to find a solution that works, a legislative solution, whether it comes from a Democrat, a Republican, or an independent. I'd even try to be blind to the source of it, if that were possible, in evaluating ideas and legislation. And in so doing, I think that in itself will generate a collegial attitude which will benefit Vermonters and Americans. I agree. The polarization that has occurred with astounding intensity in the last 6 months, year, 2 years, 5 years, or even 12 is something that needs to be conscientiously reversed, but it starts in the heart and mind of the individual senator and congressman.
Bernie Sanders?
Well, that is a good question. Yeah, I would remind Jennifer that in the late 1990s, and this will surprise some people, I passed more amendments, that was when I was in the House, more amendments on the floor of the House that were bipartisan, that's when the Republicans controlled the House, than any other member of the Congress. And what you do is you look at the issues. In fact, one of the amendments that we passed had to do with the high cost of prescription drugs. I worked with the late Senator John McCain on the most comprehensive veterans bill in recent history. So I think the goal here is to look at the issues. I think we have some potential. I think Republicans understand, as well as Democrats and independents, that our infrastructure is collapsing in this country, that we need to invest heavily in rebuilding our roads and our bridges and our water systems and our airports, and we can create many millions of good-paying jobs in doing that. That can be a bipartisan issue. So I think you look at the issues and you go from there in a bipartisan way.
Our fourth listener question comes from John in Putney, and we can kind of roll this right into the lightning round if you'll oblige. So, fairly quickly, about 30 seconds. What is the one biggest problem in America today, is what John in Putney is hoping you'll respond to. And Senator Sanders, you go first.
It's a hard question, but I think the answer is that I worry very, very much about the growth of oligarchy and authoritarianism in this country. And by oligarchy, I mean you today have an incredibly unfair distribution of wealth and power. And with that incredible wealth of the people on top, they are now spending hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars to buy elections. So the fact that American democracy is evolving into a system where a handful of billionaires have enormous economic and political power is something that worries me very deeply.
Lauren Supan.
Again, I would say that the place where you find authoritarian oligarchy is in socialist countries. That's not what you find in America. Although, and Senator Sanders is fond of talking about the distribution of wealth as if that's somehow the responsibility of government. The distribution of wealth occurs by people and companies producing wealth that didn't exist before.
So if not that, what's the biggest problem facing in America? That's what John wants you to answer.
The biggest problem facing America is Senator Sanders' success in persuading people that America isn't the greatest country in the world.
All right, so let's do a couple of lightning round questions. We've got a little bit of time, and these, if you can keep them to 15 seconds or less, that would be helpful. We can get more in. What should our minimum wage be, Lauren Supan?
Well, I would invite Senator Sanders to join me in acknowledging that $15 an hour is totally inadequate for a living wage. In fact, I would invite him to join me in considering solving the benefits cliff problem, because even if we force employers to pay $15 an hour, many people will fall off the benefits cliff, meaning that they will no longer be eligible for benefits. So what I think we need to do is, and this is a problem that can be solved, and when it's solved, it'll solve two problems at once, because we'll have more people productively re-entering the workforce because they're not worried about losing their benefits, and we will have people enjoying the pride and privilege of being productive members of society.
This is lightning, remember.
Okay.
Bernie Sanders.
Zupan didn't answer the question.
What do you think?
And the answer to the question is that nobody in America who works 40 hours a week should be living in poverty. And I'm very proud, Mr. Zupan may not like it, but I'm very proud that as a result of my presidential campaign and working with people in the fight for 15 plus a union, we have made real progress all over this country in making it clear that at the very least, every worker in America should earn $15 an hour as a federal minimum wage. And right now, that means replacing a $7.25 starvation minimum wage in Congress.
Bernie Sanders, do transgender people deserve legal protected status?
Yes.
Lauren Zupan?
Everybody deserves legal protected status in this country, every citizen.
Including transgender people?
Yes.
To preserve their identity?
I'm not sure what you mean by that.
President Trump has said he would consider legislating out the idea that somebody could have their gender be what they say their gender is, what their gender identity is, rather than what is either on their birth certificate or what genitalia they have.
This is a complicated question that deserves a lot of study, because it's clear that people are usually born, as I've noticed in my 71 years, one gender or another. What is the cost to society of establishing a third gender? This is not to tell people what they could do with their surgical preferences, but when you ask society to make a judgment about it and alter the whole infrastructure of society around it, it needs to be studied.
Okay. Time now for a closing statement from each candidate, and we determined the order via a secret private coin flip yesterday. Senator Sanders, you get to start us off.
Well, let me begin by thanking you for sponsoring this debate, and most importantly, thanking the people of Vermont for allowing me to represent them for 2 terms in the United States Senate, as well as 16 years in the House. And Jane, what I have tried to do is take the values of this very great state of ours and stand up for justice, economic justice, social justice, environmental justice, racial justice, to try to create an economy which is not dominated by the people on top but works for everybody, try to revitalize American democracy in respecting and understanding the town meetings that we have. One person, one vote, not billionaires buying elections. So what I have done is try to take Vermont's values to Washington, and I would very humbly ask the people of Vermont to allow me to serve another term.
Lauren Zupan.
Thank you, Jane, and thank you to VPR and for everybody here who is part of the infrastructure of this program. I am thrilled at the prospect and the opportunity to serve the people of the state of Vermont. Our system of free enterprise has brought more success in the shortest amount of time by feeding, housing, and clothing with freedom more people in the history of the world. The people of Vermont have been an important part of the backbone of our nation, and the principles of independence and self-care and taking care of one's neighbor have always been part and parcel of our greatness. This is a system which is on the threshold right now of breaking out into a golden age of renaissance. Instead, what Senator Sanders wants to offer us is a system of top-down government control where the government exercises its rights to tell us everything we can, have, and should do. I ask that we reinvigorate in this digital golden age of Vermont's renaissance the principles that made America great in the first place. I would be honored to have your vote to be a full-time, dedicated, 6-year senator for all the people of Vermont. Thank you.
Well, that concludes the VPR Vermont PBS Senate debate here on Vermont Edition. I want to thank our participating candidates, Bernie Sanders and Lawrence Zupan.
My pleasure.
You can find VPR's campaign coverage, including interviews with all the candidates on the ballot for statewide and federal office, at our website, vpr.net. The VPR Vermont PBS debate series is produced by Sam Gale Rosen, Patty Daniels, Keith Swan, Brian Stevenson, Rick Singari, and Matthew Smith. We have production support from Michelle Owens and Ty Robertson. Audio engineering is by Chris Albertine, Frank Alwine, Mary Engish, and Peter Engish. Project managers were Anna Post and John Van Hoosen. Music is by Eric Ewazen and the New Trombone Collective. I'm Jane Lindholm. Thanks for joining us.